Gaia, as we know it today, was not always peaceful, nor was it safe. There was chaos in the form of monsters. As there is with any living creature, you have degenerates, the evil in the world. But on the other side of that, there were kind and gentle creatures that some still considered monsters, but made peace with them to save the planet from being torn apart by hate and war. But the humans still lived in fear that one day that the monsters would revolt against humanity and destroy us all. So they began to build strongholds to help protect everyone on the planet. There came a wise king who made a decision that would affect the kingdom for the better. He declared that all beings of Gaia, human or monster, had the right to live, the right to own land, the right to provide for their family, the right to exist. Peace eventually came to the planet, but there was still some who believed that they were inferior to the humans, that Gaia was theirs and would fight to the death for it. And everyone, human, monster alike, worried if there was an impending war in the future, which could be catastrophic for all the beings that reside on the beautiful planet we call Gaia. I lived on a farm with my father, mother, and annoying old adopted brother on the outskirts of Tarvin, a principality of the kingdom. We grew our own crops and tended our cattle, so there was never a shortage of food for our family, and the extra my father would sell at market. We were happy, we were comfortable, we never needed for anything. The only thing that made my life on the farm with my parents unbearable was my brother. A long time ago, my parents found a baby lying in his mother's chest on the streets of Tarvin. His mother had died of an illness that was unknown. My parents brought him home and raised them as their own. All we were ever able to do was fight. We absolutely hated each other. It was as if we were mortal enemies, as if because he was first, I didn't belong. I never understood it, but he was so insufferable then. My mother always told us we were special, that she loved us both the same. But she would tell me when we were alone I was something more, that there were not many like me around, and that one day I could be very powerful. I would always wonder what she meant by that, not knowing what made me so special. I thought I was just like everyone else, until the day of my 15th birthday, when my mother asked if I would like to know what I was. Anxious and excited, I sat in awe of her words, not knowing whether to believe what I was being told. But after listening to my mother explain, I quickly realized I was no regular human. I was something more. She told me I could do things she wasn't able to. I was shocked. I could control the wind, as well as make plants blossom and produce quicker than normal. I could speak things into existence, cause things to happen that I never intended. She said that I was a Naga. I thought about what my mother had told me, and that night I wasn't able to sleep. I kept wondering why my mother would think that I could be that powerful. I got up to get a drink of water and heard something coming from my brother's room. It was almost as if he was having a conversation with someone, but his was the only voice I was hearing. He sounded frightened. So I opened the door to ask if he was okay, but he froze and slowly turned toward me. He told me to go back to bed and shoved me out the door. So I went and got my water and went back to my room, where I sat awake all night wondering if my brother was okay. We might have hated each other, but he was still my brother, and I couldn't help but worry that he was ill or something had happened that he isn't telling our family. The next morning, I went downstairs to help my mother with breakfast. I told my mother what I had saw the night before. She seemed concerned and said she would try to find out what was going on and to help finish breakfast before my father came to the table. During the time it took to eat, my mind was going what seemed in like 1,000 directions. My 15-year-old brain couldn't handle the overload that was happening, and I ended up blurring out the rest of the time at the table. Hearing my father's deep voice between all the loud commotion in my head, I snapped to, and he told us it was time to clean up. So me and my brother carried the dishes to the kitchen to be washed, where I finally stopped him and asked what the hell had happened the night before. He just looked at me and shook his head. I insisted he tell me, but he just brushed it off and told me to mind my own nose, and he proceeded to walk outside, where he made his way to the barn where our father was tending to the morning duties. After finishing the dishes, I politely asked my mother if she could further explain what she had told me the day before. She paused for a moment and asked me to take a walk with her. She proceeded to tell me that my soul came from a place of wonder, a place of ornamented palaces, gorgeous groves, and vast lakes and mountains that was too beautiful for the eyes to behold. A place that consisted of 7 realms, the underworld, more specifically, Nagaloka, which is where all the Naga's souls reside. As we walked, me hanging on every word that come from her lips, she revealed to me that at one time the Nagas were too plentiful and were sent to live in the underworld. Confused, I asked my mother where this place was. She simply said the caves of Patala. She further explained to me that the humans and the other kind of this world might one day find out about me, and it could be dangerous. I asked why. She said even though there is a truce in the land, it was forged on uneasy ground and will not guarantee my safety. After listening to what my mother had told me, I was still in disbelief. What did all of this really mean, and why me? I didn't know what to think, what to do. The only thing I could think of was to somehow record everything my mother had told me. That way I could try and make sense of it a little at a time. I remember writing down everything in the old language of that time. I finished writing and tucked the piece of papyrus in my clothes to come back to when I needed to remember. Later that evening, I noticed my parents speaking to my brother in the entryway of our home, so I eavesdropped to try and hear what was being said. I wasn't fortunate enough to hear the full conversation, but I heard my brother mention the name Mercury, and that was all I understood. I had never heard of a person named Mercury before, so I wondered if there was something wrong with my brother. Is he going to be okay? Then it dawned on me. Is he different like me? The next few weeks were quiet in our home. Our mother was making a trip to Tarvin almost every day. I asked her why, and she said there was business she was tending to. Then one day my mother came to my brother and I and asked if we could converse. We sat down and she began to explain to us the severity of the situation we could possibly find ourselves in. She had been going to Tarvin to see a local seer and explained to the woman what had happened to my brother. The seer immediately knew that my brother was like her, an oracle, and because he was a male, people may come after him. Confused, we asked what an oracle was, and she told us it was someone who had the ability to speak with the gods. She was worried the other humans would perceive us as the other kind, meaning we would have a target on our backs. She told us that no matter what, we have to protect each other and never leave one another behind. She told my brother that protecting me was just as important as me protecting him. After hearing all that our mother had said, we quickly realized that one day we would only have each other, but we weren't prepared for what was coming. That night, while my mother and I prepared for bed, my brother asked if our father still needed help in the barn. She said no, and for us to go get washed up and get ready for bed. As I was turning down my sheets, I heard my father screaming outside. I ran to the hallway where I met my brother and ran down the stairs only to be met with our father running through the door screaming. It wasn't until then I realized there was something on the other side trying to get in. My father screamed at us to run, but we just stood there too scared to even move. Then he screamed again with a guttural voice saying to run, and our mother quickly ran to the door to help our father barricade the door. She looked at my brother and I and told us to run and never look back. I was too scared to move. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes and tells my brother it's time to be the protector. My brother grabs my arm and pulls me back to the back door, fighting him the entire way to get back to our parents. When finally I saw the door break and the beast that was on the other side, almost as if it was a gigantic wolf from hell with fiery red eyes. It was terrifying, and the last thing I remember seeing is my father losing his life and hearing the mortal screams coming from my mother, as in no doubt she lost hers as well. My brother shook me and said, "Run, now." Running away, the only thing I could think about was the screams of my parents, and I would never see the people who raised my brother and myself again. They were gone, and it was just us. Forever. I remember running for hours when I finally told my brother I needed a break. I needed water. He agreed, and we found a stream to take a drink from and sat down on a nearby fallen tree, where we both started crying. We were broken. We watched our parents lose their life to a monster. I looked at my brother, who I had never seen cry a day in my life, lose it. I sat there for a moment and reached over to hug my brother. He looked up at me with tear-soaked eyes and asked what we were going to do. I wiped my own tears away from my face and told him we'd do as our mother said. We'd take care of each other. We'd protect each other. Otherwise, their deaths would be in vain. We sat there for a moment and decided we should move on. To where? We had no clue, because we knew we could never return home. The pain was too fierce. So we pushed forward, living off the land. Somehow my brother knew what plants were safe to eat and the ones that weren't. He became a great hunter, always able to get us a meal. We decided the best thing to do was to make ourselves resilient, trained to survive, and we did. We became warriors of our own time, pushing forward, never quitting, because the moment that we did, the pain came rushing back and it was too much for us to bear. After living like nomads for years, we came to a place that was different from our home. It was cold and had a white covering on the ground. The water looked like a sheet of glass and didn't flow like the waterways from home. My brother said we might be able to find food on the other side of the waterway. I was hesitant. I had never walked on frozen water before, but he assured me it would be fine. He stepped onto the ice and looked back and assured it would hold. He kept walking out onto the hard surface, and I felt more at ease. Watching him, I knew I'd be able to do it as well. I went to step down when I saw my brother stopped. He yelled for me to stay where I was. He turned around slowly, and that's when I saw it, a crack in the surface that grew with every step he took. I watched as the hard water broke and my brother went under. I watched in horror as the ice began to crack everywhere and I could no longer see him. I heard him scream from down the waterway. I looked, and he had to be 50 yards down. I took off running along the bank to try and catch him, but I looked and could no longer see my brother. He was gone, and for the first time in my life, I was truly alone. I looked for what seemed hours for my brother, but he was nowhere to be found. I found myself feeling that same emptiness I felt many years before. I fell to the ground and began to sob uncontrollably, ending in a frightening scream that echoed through the cold white forest. I sat cold and alone, and for the first time in a long time, I was afraid. I didn't know what I would do without my brother, but I realized he was gone, just like my parents. I laid down on the cold forest floor and thought of when I was a child, how comforting it was to be home, seeing the sweet smile of my mother, giving anything to annoy my brother one last time. But I knew our time had passed. Then I remembered everything my mother had told me, and an angry fire lit inside me, and it burned me to my core. It was because of this vicious monster that I am in the position I am in now, and I vowed from that moment I would have his head on a stake for all the world to behold. I reached inside the layers of my clothes and pulled out that crumpled piece of papyrus from long ago. It's time, I thought, and I said goodbye to my brother and set off to find the caves of Patala. When I decided to search for the caves of Patala, I didn't know how long of a journey it was going to be. All I knew is I needed to find it because I had nowhere else to go. It was as if it immediately had a pull from deep inside that instinctively led me where I needed to go. Like my soul was connected. So I began my journey, and I traveled for many, many months, as if I had already known where it was all along. The closer I became, the stronger the pull I felt inside. I eventually crossed into a land with a lush jungle, with many different creatures, beautiful flowers, and I thought to myself, I could love this place. After what seemed like days inside the jungle, I came to a spot that was like a shimmer in the air. I reached out my hand to feel it. It felt very thin, and I wondered if it was passable. So I took a deep breath, not knowing what was on the other side, and went through the thin shimmer. When I crossed over, I opened my eyes to a completely different realm. How could it have went from a jungle to a cavern? I thought, this has to be the cave of Patala. Did I finally make it? I made my way into the cave that had spikes of rocks coming from the top and bottom of the cave, and as I continued walking, a being slithered out from behind one of the tall rock formations on the cavern floor. The being looked as if it was half human, half serpent. At first I was frightened, but then remembered what my brother had taught me, never to show fear. The being spoke with a lisp to his words like a snake sounds when it hisses. He demanded me to stop, saying, "Halt, young mortal, you have no business here." I stood my ground and explained to him everything my mother had told me years ago. He looked at me confused and asked if I was sure if what my mother had told me was true. I assured him it was, and that I had come to find out who I truly am. He gracefully nodded and led me down the dark cavern. We reached the stopping point, and the being turned and looked at me only to say, "I stopped you only to tell you this. If this is what you truly choose, then you will forever reside where your soul truly belongs, never to leave or roam the world again, as we are forbidden to walk the surface of the world." I stood there with nothing left to lose and simply said, "Show me the way." As we crossed the threshold into this realm, I could not believe my eyes. Everything my mother had told me was the truth. Lavish palaces, wondrous skies, beautiful monuments that looked like the being who led me here. The further and further we went, the more I am finally at peace with myself. I am finally where I am supposed to be. He led me to the center of civilization, where he turned and said that this would be my home forevermore, and that I was free to travel inside the realm as I pleased. He assured me I was no prisoner, that I was free. He smiled and continued to show me the way to a house that was made of gold with jade accents along the walls. It was remarkable, to say the least. I asked him if this was for me, and he simply nodded. I stood there for a moment in disbelief before I went in and thought to myself, I wish my brother could see this. I wish he was here. But I knew that that would never be, so I shook my head and walked in the door. I felt content when I was inside, as if it was mine all along. So with a deep breath, I accepted the fate that laid before me. Over the next few months, while adjusting to my new home, I befriended the being that brought me here. I learned that his name was Yoki, a very sweet but intense Naga. We were inseparable, and it reminded me of my brother, and I spent the next few years with him, teaching me all the ways of the Naga. I trained day and night, learning to control my powers, learning that controlling my temper was the most important lesson, because being a Naga means that I can speak things into existence. So simply saying the wrong thing can cause chaos, can cause pain and misfortune. But my favorite thing to do was help the flowers and plants of this wondrous place grow and flourish. I guess it was because it reminded me of the times I had with my mother in our garden, and that was a memory I never wanted to lose. Sometime later, Yoki came to me while I was tending to the flowers around my home. There was something I needed to see, and to hurry and come with him. He was always so nice and caring. I guess it was because he knew how much I truly missed home. But he persisted, and it was extremely important, so without hesitation, I followed my friend. As I followed my friend, I realized we were heading towards the cavern. I asked him if something was wrong, and he did not answer. He just kept going, and I followed. He looked sad. We came to the entrance of the cave, where he turned and said, "There is a human here that I believe you need to speak with." He moved to the side, and I looked towards a shimmering covering that I walked through only years before. I saw what seemed to be a man, and I walked closer. I got to the edge of the veil, and my eyes grew wide. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It was my brother, my protector, my best friend. He spoke and said, "Guinea." I launched towards him, screaming, "Mikhail," only to be stopped by the veil. I suddenly remembered that I could not cross back. I was here for all eternity. My friend saw the distraught look in my eyes and said, "Remember everything I taught you, everything you trained for. But the only way for you to go back is if someone pulls you through, someone who does it from a place of love." I gave my friend a hug and told him thank you, and I would never forget him. I turned to my brother and felt the draw to this place break as he pulled me through the veil, where I felt his warm embrace once again. After reuniting with my brother, I still could not believe my eyes. I felt as if I was back in my dreams. He began to tell me his story of where he had been and what he had been doing. I listened to him speak, hanging on every word. He then began to tell me of the beast that killed our parents. He had met a being named Pharaoh, who spoke of the beast and told my brother his name was Luparu, and that he was the first of his kind, and he had been creating progeny of his own to build numbers of beasts like himself. He explained that Luparu was a man with the wherewithal to become a wolf, but no regular wolf, a vicious, bloodthirsty monster. It was becoming very arduous for me to control my temper. I wanted to chase after the man-beast head-on, but I knew we would have to find him first and plan an attack from there, if we were to have any chance at all. My brother had developed his oracle abilities over the years, and they were our only way to find Luke-Guru. My brother would converse with the gods of this universe, and they would give him direction on what could be done next. While traveling, I noticed a man standing in our path. I told my brother we should be careful, we do not know this man. He explained that the man was Nergal, one of the gods he frequently speaks with, and he was here to help. I was amazed that I could actually see him. Nergal spoke and warned us that we were getting dangerously close to Luke-Guru's den, and we needed to tread lightly. We thanked Nergal and continued forward, before we realized we were surrounded, undoubtedly by Luke-Guru's progeny. When lastly we recognized the blood-red eyes in the back of the crowd of beasts, we both knew who it was, as well as what was about to happen. We grasped one another's hand one final time while running straight into our last battle. We had our skin torn by the sharp claws of the beings we were at war with, teeth sinking into our flesh. With one last look at each other, we knew this day would be our last, but my blood boiled like lava, and I swore, as I took my last breath, I would one day return to take the life of the beast that took everything away from us, including our own lives. Crossing over to the afterlife is like walking down through a long dark hallway. When I arrived, the very first thing I did was find my family. I thought we would all be together in bliss, but my brother decided to stay in Sheol, so I decided to stay with him. I saw my parents every chance that I could. After some time went by, I decided I wanted to help, so I was offered a new position in the afterlife, their very first monster hunter. I immediately jumped at the chance. I had ulterior motives, though. I finally found my way to have my chance at the monster that I have hated for so many years, and I was going to succeed. Later, my brother came to me with another job opportunity working behind the scenes, and with that I became the first soul to deliver the karma that was delivered on Gaia, good or bad, in the Karmafia.